The wealthy man sent a vagabond to his dying wife's hospital room in his place and went to his mistress. Upon receiving a video call. Today, there was a commotion at the city hospital. Ash Corey, the wife of a prominent businessman, was being transferred to the private clinic Virginia. The initiator of this, her husband Eric, was not present beside his wife, who had been in a coma for the second week. Why is Corey being transferred from intensive care? Wondered Benjamin, the intensivist. She shouldn't be moved right now. Whose ridiculous idea is this? We have orders from above. It's better if you don't interfere, said the specialists from the private clinic handling Ash's transportation. Does her husband know what's happening here? The doctor fumed. This could harm her, and why isn't he here at such a critical moment? It was Eric Corey who insisted on transferring his wife to us. Here are all the documents, the private medics replied. And he's not with us because he's a busy man. Our task is to deliver the patient and connect her to life support, while your task is to hand over the accompanying documents and assist us. Besides, what difference does it make if her husband is here or not? Everything is paid for. Benjamin stood, hands lowered, marveling at human indifference and greed. His patient, into whom he had invested so much time and effort to bring her out of a critical state, was being dragged away like a stray dog to who knows where. He had given her husband good prognosis, and now, with her being jostled and switched from one machine to another, who knows how her body might react. He stopped the gurney carrying Ash and adjusted the blanket, checking her vitals at the same time. After the patient was taken away, Benjamin found Corey's phone number and called him. Hello, this is your wife's attending physician. Why are you transferring her to another clinic? And without informing me, knowing full well that this could harm her? Don't you trust our hospital because it's free? Or are you dissatisfied with me as her doctor? You know what, Dr. Benjamin? This is my personal matter and none of your business, Eric replied haughtily to the man who had brought his wife back from the brink. I decide where she gets treated. I'm busy and can't talk right now. Goodbye. To himself, Corey thought, what a nosy doctor. You treated my wife too well, so I'm transferring her. Eric Corey was indeed busy, enjoying his time with yet another fling. In certain circles, he was considered quite the ladies' man, always chasing skirts. This time, it was a 22-year-old girl named Claire who had entirely captivated the attention of the high-profile businessman as she saw Eric Corey. But in reality, the real powerhouse was Ash, who had built the Corey empire from scratch. She and Eric had married while still in college, and even then, the brilliant economist Ash had dreamed of running her own company. Gathering a team of talented peers, Ash achieved her goal and became a successful businesswoman. Her husband Eric was merely an accessory to her success. To avoid embarrassing her inept husband, who understood nothing about business, Ash arranged it so that he was considered her assistant and right-hand man. However, both he and the employees knew that Eric wasn't even fit to be her left foot. Even their country house was built by Ash without her husband's help, as he was always daydreaming and loved nightlife. Ash herself found the contractor, oversaw the construction, and regularly visited the plot near the pine forest and small river that reminded her of her hometown. But Ash fell ill. She suddenly collapsed at work. Initially, the doctors thought that she had exhausted herself from overwork or had been poisoned by competitors, but the problem was much deeper. Ash had unknowingly developed a nasty and dangerous disease inherited from her maternal grandmother. The illness quietly crept up on her just as Ash was on the brink of taking her company to the international level. Terrible timing. But then again, illness always comes at the worst times. It was frustrating. However, her new partners saw huge potential in her and promised to wait for her recovery, but it never came, and now Ash had been in a coma for over a week. Eric tried to negotiate with the new business partners, but they quickly realized that he was just an ordinary incompetent fool, like so many in the business world. Why don't you sell the company in parts? That would be more profitable, suggested the lovely Claire. You'll get the money, we'll go abroad to some warm place by the sea, buy a little house, hire servants, and enjoy life. And what about Ash? You should think before you speak, Eric grumbled discontentedly. The company is registered to her. It will only pass to me in the event of her death, that's stated in the company's charter. Then disconnect her from the life support, Claire said simply, as if she were talking about a fly. Why torture her and yourself? You have the right to do so. And what will I tell her parents? Eric asked his lover. Do you know what kind of father she has? Even though he's from the countryside, he wouldn't hesitate to beat me up. His fists are as big as your head. And her mother is quite a troublemaker. She didn't want Ash to marry me, saying why would she need such a freeloader? My mother-in-law thinks I'm too handsome and wear perfume like women do. In her opinion, I should work like a mule and smell like one too. Can you imagine if these relatives show up here? That's why I haven't told them that my wife is in a bad condition. Claire kept quiet and pouted. She was eager to get rid of her rival and completely win over Eric's heart, and of course, his money, which she imagined was quite a lot. The next morning, while Eric and Claire were having breakfast, entertaining each other with gossip about mutual acquaintances, Eric received a call from Ash's new attending physician. Hello, Eric Lester, said a cheerful male voice. This is Miles, an intensivist from the Virginia Clinic. I have an unusual proposal for you. To successfully bring your wife out of her coma and further restore her cognitive functions, I request that you visit the intensive care unit more often and talk to her more. Why should I talk to someone who hasn't responded to anything in a long time? It's a waste of time. You surprised me, to be honest, Eric said irritably. No, you're wrong. Patients in this state can hear everything perfectly, but they need help, the doctor tried to assure Eric. She really needs your help, the help of a close person, do you understand? All right, I'll think about it, Eric said dryly and hung up. Claire sat at the table, absent-mindedly fiddling with her phone. Seeing her lover's upset face, she asked. Who called? The doctor from the clinic. They even bother me here. What am I paying them for? Eric replied. He thinks I really want to sit next to a vegetable and tell her stories. I have nothing better to do. She's going to die soon anyway, and all the efforts will be in vain. And I don't want to go there. I don't like all those hospital walls, the terrible sight of my wife, BRR. Then don't go, Claire suggested. Send someone else in your place. They haven't seen your face, right? Just hire some fool to sit there and tell her stories. Pay him a little, and he'll be happy to do it. It's a simple task. Eric's luxury car sped down the highway to the city, ignoring speed limits. He was hurrying to gift Claire with a lavish piece of jewelry, but as he approached the bridge leading to the jewelry store, a tire blew out. Damn it. Eric got out of the car and helplessly looked at the flat tire, then glanced at his neat manicure. What bad luck. Need some help? A young man approached Eric, who eyed him disdainfully and stepped back a couple of paces, as if avoiding a flea-ridden dog. The young man resembled either a vagabond or some street artist. He was dressed fairly neatly, but very modestly. Intelligence shone in his eyes, and kind sparks glittered. My tire just blew out, Eric complained. Can you replace it? I'll pay you. I'm in a hurry to make a gift for my beloved, and the nearest auto service is far away. Can you handle it? How much will you charge? Of course, I'll help. Just give me a little time. As for payment, I won't take any from you. People should help as they can, the young man smiled. The task was quickly accomplished in the hands of the vagabond, and soon a new tire stood in place of the damaged one. Eric was pleased. He liked the guy's efficient work, and an absurd thought crossed the mind of the errant husband. What's your name? Eric asked the vagabond. Neil, the young man answered, brushing road dust off his pants. I'm Eric, the wealthy man said, deciding not to mention his surname. You're a clever lad. Do you drink? I respect women, I love books, and I'm not friends with the green snake, Neil answered in one go and laughed. Does that answer your questions? Quite, Eric smirked. So, I need a caretaker for my wife. She's currently in a coma. The attending doctor says I need to spend a lot of time in a room, reading and talking, well, just communicating, as if she were normal. Why don't you want to do it yourself? Neil asked, surprised. Aren't you bothered that another man will spend time with your wife? Doesn't bother me, Eric replied sharply. So, are you willing to take it on? I'll pay, of course. I have my doubts, Neil replied. Why don't you want to help her yourself, and how am I supposed to explain my presence in your wife's room? What will the doctors say? Oh, I don't have time to sit with her. I have a business to run, Eric explained. And as for the doctors, they haven't seen me in person. They don't care who the man with their patient is, as long as the money keeps coming in. It's a private clinic. What kind of gift are you planning to buy her, by the way? A new book for reading? Neil inquired. A gift? It's not for her, Eric replied shortly. So, are you willing? Neil was astonished by such shameless attitude towards his wife and silently pitied the poor woman. Out loud, he said, Okay, I agree. Pity for your wife. By the way, what's her name? And I owe a lot of money to an appliance store. I worked there as a loader, unloading goods, grabbed a box with a TV, and wouldn't you know it, the TV fell out and ended up smashed. They said if I don't pay off the debt in 2 months, they'll report me to the police for theft, pin all kinds of fraudulent schemes on me, and I won't be able to prove anything. I don't have money for a lawyer anyway, so here I am, trapped like a chicken without feathers. Well, let me pay off your debt, Eric offered, delighted to have gotten off so cheaply. And you sit with my wife for that. Her name's Ash. Okay, agreed, Neil said. Ash is a beautiful name. Eric rubbed his hands joyfully. Well, I need to get to work, Neil realized suddenly. I've got to work off the debt for the TV. I'm practically a powerless slave there. I'm afraid they'll start charging interest on top of everything else. Those people are serious. Well, let's go see them now, and I'll sort everything out with them, Eric proposed. But first, we should tidy you up a bit. Let's stop by a couple of places. Neil had never been to upscale clothing stores before, so he felt lost amidst the fine men's suits and elite leather shoes. When an arrogant consultant approached them and gave Neil a disdainful glance, Neil felt completely dejected and wanted to leave. However, Eric was unfazed. He was in his element, paying no mind to the salesman and his contemptuous looks towards Neil. He sternly said, Right, we need to dress up this young man here, and please do it quickly. And you can keep your smirks to yourself. They don't pay you for those, do they? Though Neil was grateful to Eric for the help, he was now worried about the new debt that was rapidly growing. The items here cost an exorbitant amount of money. How am I supposed to pay for all this clothing? He fretted. Socks here cost as much as a full winter coat in an ordinary store. Don't worry, it's all covered in your allowance, Eric replied. Besides, I'll deposit a certain amount into your account, and I think you won't look like a vagabond anymore. You need to match my status. No one should doubt the substitution. Also, did you see the face of that consultant? Yeah, arrogant type, off-putting, Nikita responded. You should treat the medical staff the same way, lectured Eric. But I don't know how to do that, Neil objected. No worries, you'll learn, smirked the businessman. But with your wife, of course, you must be delicate and respectful, even though Ash won't understand. She's in a coma. As far as I know, people in comas can hear everything, so I'll do my best, Neil assured fervently. You won't regret hiring me. 30 minutes later, the former vagabond looked like a city dandy straight from the cover of a glossy magazine. A fashionable gray suit fit his slender frame perfectly, and his polished shoes exuded novelty and luxury. Counting out the cash, Eric paid for the purchases with a haughty wave of his hand, while Neil observed his mannerisms closely. The show was about to begin. First, the conspirators went to the appliance store where the young man had accidentally incurred a fine. When the store owner saw the expensive foreign car parked right outside the entrance, he rushed out to greet the wealthy clients. He immediately started extolling the virtues of his products. "Don't bother," Eric cut him off. "We've come to pay off your debt for the TV and the interest accrued on it." Neil, pay the man. With a thick stack of banknotes and handed them to his former employer, who recognized his former loader. Suddenly shrinking in stature, he mumbled something incoherent, making excuses and bowing profusely until brave Eric and Neil got back in the car and drove off to their respective tasks. "I bet he's thinking right now that you're a secretive millionaire who decided to live among common people," Eric laughed. "I think he's recalling how rudely he treated you and worrying if it'll come back to bite him." "I felt a bit awkward," Neil admitted. "He looked so pitiful, just like I did when that cursed TV broke." "Pity yourself," grumbled his mentor, stepping on the gas. At the Beryaska clinic, Eric was already expected. No one noticed any difference, so Neil put his newly acquired knowledge into practice and portrayed an important person. The chief doctor of the clinic, Benjamin Scott, came out to meet their esteemed guest himself. "Glad to see you, Eric Lester," he fawned before the wealthy man. "Your wife is in stable condition. She recently had a massage and vitamin infusion to maintain her tone. She really needs your presence to recover quickly and get back on her feet." "Hello," Neil replied, trying to maintain a haughty demeanor. "Where's the room?" He was escorted directly to Ash's bedside and left alone with his wife. When Neil saw the young woman in her helpless state, so fragile, so pale, he felt deeply sorry for her. Not only because she had once been a powerful businesswoman full of strength, but also because her own husband didn't even want to be with her in these difficult times. All these tubes and medical devices in the room slightly intimidated him, but he pulled himself together because the person lying before him was facing something much scarier and harder. "Good afternoon, Ash," Neil began, addressing the patient. "I know you must hear me. Sorry for intruding on your sleep. Your husband Eric asked me to do this as he's busy supporting your business. So I've come pretending to be him, but please don't tell anyone," Neil said, smiling shyly. He thought he saw Ash's eyelashes flutter, and he enthusiastically started a conversation with the poor woman, imagining her responding to him as a normal conversational partner. "I've got a new suit," Neil said, not knowing how to start the conversation. "Shame you can't see it. It cost a fortune. I thought they were prices, not phone numbers. And those salespeople. I was even afraid of them. Your husband is so brave the way he commands them. I wish I could be like that." Neil settled into a comfortable chair, nervously fiddling with the edge of his jacket as he looked around. The room was equipped with state-of-the-art technology, the furniture was new, and there were fresh flowers on the table, a vase of fruit, and a small refrigerator stocked with water and snacks. "Can I have an apple?" he asked Ash. "I'm really hungry. I haven't had anything since morning." And without waiting for an answer, he took a bite of the juicy red apple. "Oh, sweet," Neil exclaimed. "The neighbors grow sour, green ones. Sometimes I do gardening for them. Get well soon. There's so much delicious stuff here." Out of habit, Neil waited for a response from his conversation partner, but suddenly realized there wouldn't be one. He felt unbearably sorry for poor Ash, who by fate's will found herself confined to bed. "What kind of books do you like?" Neil asked, looking at the patient. "Let me try to guess. The Color Purple? Or Gone with the Wind? Or maybe something from Harry Potter? I'm not very wealthy, but I have a big library. All these books were passed on to me by friends and acquaintances. It's strange, but people don't like reading nowadays. Tomorrow, I'll bring a couple of books, and we can start. Well, I'll read, and you can listen, all right? But for now, let's make do with what we have." Neil walked out into the corridor and headed to the duty nurse. "Miss, do you happen to have any light reading books?" he asked her. "Check in the lounge. There's a small library there." Neil went to the lavishly furnished lounge, which looked more like the lobby of a foreign hotel. And the bookshelves made of red wood, untouched and neatly arranged books caught his eye. He immediately thought, "Yes, this book will suit Ash. It's just right for women, and it was written by a woman too." From this book began a new stage in Neil and Ash's acquaintance. Reading took up most of his time spent with the patient. The medical staff was impressed by the husband's attitude towards his wife. "He's been sitting there for 5 hours already," the nurses whispered. "You can tell he loves her a lot. He's really concerned." "But why didn't he come to her earlier?" "Well, I guess he was busy," others replied. "After all, he's a serious businessman." If time spent in the hospital with Ash flew by for Neil, for her husband Eric, it dragged on unbearably long. "How's your wife doing? Still alive?" Claire asked discontentedly. "When will our ordeal end? With the money you've spent maintaining her in this clinic, you could have bought an apartment." "The doctors say Ash's condition is stable. There have even been some improvements," Eric tiredly responded to his lover's criticisms. "Besides, my man is with her, reporting on all changes in her health. Doctors don't give guarantees for a full recovery, miracles don't happen, so you don't need to worry. Soon all the company's assets will be mine. In 2 weeks, the board of directors will convene precisely on this matter, and I will take control and then sell everything." "Oh, that's great!" Claire exclaimed. "You're so decisive, I adore you." These two didn't even suspect that something unusual would happen somewhere else in the city. Neil fell in love with Ash, or as he began to call her, the Sleeping Beauty. This feeling set off a chain of incredible events thanks to the wizard doctor named Travis Walker. It was he who developed a special system for the rehabilitation of comatose patients and shared it with colleagues from other clinics. So one day, when Neil was reading Ash another romantic novel, he suddenly wanted to hug her. Carefully leaning in, he pressed his lips to the young woman's cheek. "Oh, sorry, it just happened. I won't do it again," Neil said apologetically and went back to his chair, which was opposite Ash's bed. "It's okay," a quiet female voice suddenly sounded. "I'm glad. Why apologize?" Neil froze and turned around. Ash lay there, turning her face towards him, her eyes squinting. Apparently, even the soft light pouring from the lampshade was uncomfortable for her. "Eric, come closer. What are you doing? I'm so glad you've been with me all this time." Tears streamed from Ash's eyes. "How long have I been lying like this? You won't believe it, but I heard every word you said, but I couldn't shout to you. I felt like I was at the bottom of the sea, and you were somewhere above, talking, and I reached out to your voice. You saved me." Trembling with fear of being exposed, but hoping that Ash still had poor vision, Neil approached and extended his hand. She took his fingers and stroked them, staring directly at Neil, and then suddenly exclaimed, "Who are you? Where's Eric? What's going on?" "I'm glad you've come out of the coma," Neil said softly. "I've been here on behalf of your husband. He himself didn't have time to be present, you know, business, partners, and everything else you have in your business. So I spent time with you, reading, talking, monitoring your condition." "And you kissed me too?" Ash asked, astonished. "I'm sorry," Neil lowered his head. "Call the doctor," Ash said indignantly. But that wasn't necessary. Travis Walker was already running down the corridor, receiving signals from the sensors. He was smiling. His most difficult patient had finally woken up. "Darling, how glad I am," he exclaimed. "How I've been waiting for your awakening. How are you feeling? We'll conduct a few tests and take some samples. Is there something bothering you?" "I'm concerned about why there is a stranger in my room," she said. "How did you allow this?" "What stranger? This one." "Goodness, what are you saying?" the doctor exclaimed. "This is your husband Eric Lester. Don't you recognize him?" "He's not my husband," Ash countered wearily. "He's some guy who read me books, talked to me, always sat here beside me." She paused. She grasped the essence of what was happening. Neil is indeed the same savior whose voice she sought to escape from her terrible dream. Ash looked at the trembling boy in excitement. He seemed so helpless and harmless that all her anger instantly dissipated. "All right, forget it," she offered. "You, Neil, can go. I have no complaints against you, nor against the doctor." The boy took his jacket and headed for the exit. He glanced back to see Ash again, already talking to the doctor. He knew he would miss her, that much was certain. Meanwhile, Eric and Claire were enjoying a delicious dinner at an expensive restaurant. "When will you propose to me?" the girl suddenly asked. "First, we need to get divorced. Come on," Eric marveled at his lover's audacity. "And I wasn't planning to remarry yet. My wife is dying, as if you didn't know." "You're talking nonsense. What will people say? Did you have to ruin such a beautiful evening? I even turned off my phone for you. I don't want to be distracted by trivialities." "So disconnect her from the machine," Claire demanded again and tapped her foot under the table. "Enough already. My youth is passing. Just hold on. I think everything will resolve itself soon," Eric tried to calm his angered paramour. "By the way, I have a gift for you, look." And he pulled out a flat leather box from his jacket pocket. When Claire opened the case, her eyes lit up with a greedy gleam. It was the bracelet she had been daydreaming about for days and nights. Now she would have something to boast about to her girlfriends, just like other gold diggers and kept women like herself. Meanwhile, Eric had been called several times from the clinic. However, he hadn't heard or suspected that Ash had already awakened and somehow held a meal of oatmeal with water without salt, which she found tastier than any sophisticated French dessert. Ash was gathering strength and was sincerely puzzled as to why her husband wasn't by her side at such a momentous moment. "Ash, you have visitors," the attractive sister announced. "Call them," replied Ash shortly, eagerly awaiting to see her husband, for whom she had already missed. Besides, she couldn't wait to find out how things were going with the company. And her surprise could hardly have been greater when Neil appeared before her with flowers and a bag full of fruit and homemade food. "You again," said Ash, feeling that she was not angry at the young man, but rather, on the contrary, she was pleased to see him. "Yes," he nodded, "I came to ask for forgiveness." "May I?" "Well, go ahead," Ash replied, suppressing a smile. Yes, she definitely liked her savior, such a kind guy with an honest look. Such people are rarely encountered, Ash knew well, because she had been one herself. "I'm sorry for pretending to be your husband," Neil began quietly. "It happened that I ended up here thanks to him, but I will never regret it, because I liked you. And I'm just a wanderer. I don't even have my own home. I don't remember my parents. I lived in an orphanage from which I fled because of the cruelty of the director, then got involved with a bad crowd, and almost ended up in prison out of stupidity. And therefore, if you want me to leave, I will go and never disturb you again." Neil sighed heavily, as if he had run a marathon. Ash smiled. "All right, I forgive you. After all, you saved me. Without your cultural evenings, who knows how much longer I would have been in a vegetable state. As for your past, I couldn't care less. What's done is done, and I do love flowers. And your bag smells so delicious, my mouth is watering. Come on, what tasty treat did you bring? Let's have breakfast. Oh, how I'd love some chicken soup right now." And Happy Neil began unpacking his gifts. Soon, two completely different people, who had become friends amidst adversity, began breakfasting and discussing everything under the sun, unaware of the passing time. A bond formed between Ash and Neil that wasn't easily breakable. Meanwhile, the doctor quietly entered the room to examine the patient, not wanting to disturb such an idyllic scene. He was pleased to see Ash's rapid recovery, no doubt aided by her guest. When Neil left, Ash felt a sense of emptiness. She realized she was becoming attached to this man. "I have good news for you," Dr. Travis Walker finally entered for the examination. "Ash, I can't believe my eyes, but your results are excellent. After a short rehabilitation, we can discharge you. I'm incredibly happy about this, and I'd even call it a miracle, but your visitor deserves most credit. I've never seen such devotion from anyone." "Thank you, Doctor," Ash rejoiced. She was left alone in the room and suddenly felt the acute sense of loneliness. She wanted to see Neil again, but before she could think of him, he appeared at her door. "I brought chicken soup. Remember, you asked," he said softly, opening the door. She was overjoyed to see her savior, and the soup came in handy. Her young, recovering body craved home-cooked food after a prolonged illness. Once again, they dined together, talking a lot, laughing, trying not to dwell on the terrible trials they had overcome. "Shall we call my husband now?" Ash suggested. "He doesn't even know I've woken up." Maybe Eric was on a plane or in meetings with partners, which is why his phone was off. "Yeah, whatever the case, he'll come running, that shameless liar. Go ahead and call. I'll step out for a minute, won't disturb." Finally, Ash reached her husband. When Eric saw his slightly pale, noticeably thinner, yet content wife through the video call, he was almost speechless. Pushing away his lover standing nearby, he stammered, "Ash, my love, what joy. When did you wake up? And why wasn't I informed? I'm coming to you right away, love you, kiss you." Ending the call quickly and clutching his chest to calm his fiercely beating heart, Eric looked fearfully at Claire. She was furious. "I told you, you should have acted sooner. But you waited and waited, didn't you? Love you, kiss you," mocked his mistress. "Ugh, sickening to listen to. What servility. Go and tell her you no longer love her. Let her give up half of the company and money." "Fool," Eric shouted. "It's clearly stated in the prenup that if one spouse cheats on the other, the aggrieved party automatically gets the entire company and money in the divorce, understand? If Ash finds out about you, she'll file for divorce immediately, and then I'm finished. So sit here and wait for me to return." But Claire didn't want to be anyone's puppet, it wasn't her style. Left alone, she began devising a plan to improve her own life. She no longer held any hope for Eric, and she had no intention of continuing as his perpetual mistress for financial gain. Meanwhile, a real drama unfolded at the clinic, where Eric brilliantly played the role of a loving and happy husband. The medical staff had already heard about Eric's wanderings and disapprovingly watched the well-groomed man with flowers practically skipping down the clinic corridors. Eric carefully pretended not to notice the sidelong glances, as his main goal was to regain Ash's trust. "My dear," Eric murmured, "you've made me so happy. I knew everything would turn out well and that you would recover. I held out hope until the end for the best outcome and didn't believe the malicious gossip. Oh, how I love you." Neil stood at a distance, disgusted by the deceitful flattery, and suddenly began moving towards the exit. "Do you love me so much that you hired someone to be with me instead of you?" Ash chuckled. Neil stopped, curious to hear Eric's response. "Well, you know how things are nowadays, Ash," Eric wheedled. "Just for a moment I had to step away, and vultures immediately circled the company. I couldn't jeopardize your entire life's work." "Okay, maybe you're right," Ash said. "Fine, sit down, tell me how things are going." But he didn't even have time to sit on the edge of the bed before Ash said, "Neil, where are you going? I thought you'd stay with us. You're my best friend now, and Eric's too, right, Eric? He really came through for you." From Eric's expression, Neil could read exactly what Ash's husband thought about it, and he replied, "No, I'll leave you alone. You haven't seen each other for so long." "Okay," Ash persisted, "but I have a proposition for you. Please don't refuse it, don't upset me. We need helpers in the mansion's gardens, gardeners, carpenters, janitors. People like you would be very useful to us, and then we could find something better for you, maybe a job in our office." "I would be happy to, thank you," Neil replied. Neil was happy that he would be able to see Ash every day. "I can be a gardener, a carpenter, a janitor, anything," he added. Eric didn't agree with his wife's proposal, but he didn't dare to object. His position was too fragile. However, he sent Neil a scorching glance that the enamored gardener didn't notice. A week later, Ash was finally discharged. Her husband and a whole suite of personal assistants greeted her, as unfaithful Eric wanted to distract Ash's attention from himself and avoid uncomfortable questions. When Ash arrived at the gates of her home, she was surprised to discover how her beloved garden had been transformed. Every bush was trimmed, and rare varieties of roses had appeared in the flower beds. Neil stood nearby in work overalls, smiling broadly at his employer. She immediately approached him. You've really arranged everything here wonderfully, thank you, Neil. Eric, who had been watching this scene, was beside himself. He really didn't like this upstart. Claire added to Eric's displeasure that evening. Congratulations, you're going to be a father, I'm pregnant, the brazen girl blurted out. What? Eric exclaimed. As if this wasn't enough, there can't be any talk of this. So this is how you love me, darling? Claire hissed through the phone. Then take care of yourself. I'll give you a month to transfer the money to my account so I can buy a little house by the sea and live comfortably with our little one. Otherwise, I'll tell your wife everything. Remember what's in your contract in this case? When Claire hung up, Eric sat for a long time with the phone in his hand. He didn't know what to do until his gaze fell upon the family photograph of Ash. Charlotte Grace, Eric whispered into the phone, your daughter was in serious condition. She was just discharged from the hospital. We didn't want to worry you and your husband, that's why we kept silent. Please come, Ash needs your help. Eric knew that by tomorrow, his wife's parents would rush to their home, and with them, Ash wouldn't have time for business or her husband's company dealings. And it happened exactly like that. Charlotte Grace, stepping over the threshold, began to wail. My dear, how did this happen? Your father and I were almost beside ourselves. What happened? You've always been so healthy. All right, Eric told us everything, otherwise we wouldn't have known about your illness. Mom, everything is fine now, her daughter tried to reassure her, we have good doctors, and someone really helped me, literally brought me back from the brink. And who is that? Her mother asked. I'll introduce you now, Ash smiled, he works for me now. You look so much like our Sebastian, Ash's mother said, as if he had risen from the dead. Oh, my middle name is Sebastian, he said. That's right, exclaimed Nicholas Miles, Ash's father. I knew Sebastian well. Poachers killed him 25 years ago. His wife Layla was left with their little Neil. So you must be his son. And where is your mother, Layla? I don't know. I grew up in an orphanage, Neil replied. Neil was in shock. He never expected to find those who knew his family well. My boy, my dear, Charlotte Grace sobbed. Poor orphan, let's go. I'll feed you with our country food. You always loved my pastries. They entered the house. Ash was touched and intrigued by what had happened and looked at Neil with completely different eyes. Eric was no longer happy that he had invited his wife's relatives into their home, thereby bringing the gardener closer to his family. Moreover, Eric needed to pay Claire as soon as possible for her silence and was agonizingly searching for a way out of the situation. While Neil was enjoying rural snacks and discussing his difficult fate, Eric roamed the house, thinking about how to come up with a large sum of money to satisfy his mistress's insatiable greed. Then his gaze fell on the safe where the company's emergency cash was kept. With trembling hands, Eric entered the coveted code. The door opened easily, revealing neat stacks of large bills. After having the stash and carefully closing the door, Eric called Claire. Let's meet at the central bank in an hour, I have the money. Claire didn't keep him waiting, she arrived much earlier. Swiftly getting out of the car, she smiled sweetly at Eric and walked lightly to her money bag, as she called her lover. Nothing stopped her from taking the stolen money, not conscience, not Eric's gloomy looks, not even the non-existent pregnancy. Claire's scam was as old as time itself, and Eric was not the first nor the last to fall for it. On his way home, he mentally cursed his former lover and pondered how to extricate himself from this dirty story. No one in the house noticed that Eric had disappeared somewhere. Everyone was absorbed in getting to know Neil's life, which Eric took advantage of. He slipped into the guest cottage and discreetly tucked a few bills under the mattress where Neil slept. Rubbing his hands, Eric slipped out of Neil's house and stealthily rejoined the group, starting to engage in a conversation that he found absolutely uninteresting. The lack of money soon became apparent, and Ash, wanting to save the company from the consequences of her husband's unfaithful leadership, decided to inject funds. Eric, where's the money? She asked him. Did you buy something without telling me? We agreed to decide together where to spend large sums of money. I haven't taken anything. What are you talking about? He boldly lied. We have a new tenant. Maybe Neil got into the safe. But he doesn't know the code. What are you saying? Besides, he's not that kind of person. How do you know what he's like? Let's search through his things and his cabin while he's away, suggested the husband. Ash doubted that Neil could steal from her, but Eric managed to convince her to check. They entered the cabin together, where everything was in order. Eric rifled through the closet with the meager belongings of the resident, but of course, there was nothing there. Then he lifted the mattress off the bed and exclaimed with feigned surprise. Oops, here are the bills. Look, Ash, your gardener's true colors. And you didn't believe me, here's the scoundrel. What are we going to do? Maybe we wait for him? Let him explain where these bills came from, said Ash, distressed. I'm just curious, where could he have hidden the rest? Wait? No, let's call the police, let them handle it, that's their job, argued the husband. And Ash, heartbroken, reluctantly agreed. But in her heart, she couldn't believe that Neil, whom she trusted so much and owed her life to, could deceive her. Neil arrived just as the police car pulled up to the house. What's going on? He asked the homeowners, looking at them trustingly. That look made Ash's heart flutter, as if it wanted to tell her that she was wrong. But Eric knew his wife might forgive Neil, whom he despised, and told her to go inside. Ash walked away without looking back. Neil stayed. He didn't resist when they handcuffed him, only looked straight into their eyes, where there was nothing but lies and greed. So you're saying you didn't take the money, right? The investigator asked Neil. Then how did these large bills end up on your bed? I didn't take anything, Neil replied shortly, lowering his head. He was deeply hurt by Ash, who didn't even listen to him once and regretted 100 times agreeing to Eric's scheme. But the past couldn't be undone. The investigators sent him to the cell hoping he would break, as the words of a simple guy held no weight against those of a prominent businessman and respected person in town. Neil lay on the bunk and thought. Then sleep overcame him. And that night, where he was confined, was engulfed in a cloud of corrosive smoke. A terrible fire broke out, in which many inmates and guards died. Some prisoners escaped. By morning, the city knew the horrible news. People died a terrible death, many of whom couldn't be identified, and relatives ordered DNA tests. Lists of the deceased were posted on the prison wall, including Neil's surname. How can this be? Ash lamented. Neil died the same day he was incarcerated. It's all my fault. I didn't even speak to him. But what if it wasn't him? There were no signs of safe tampering. It was him, he was, Eric insisted. But then who? I want to at least bury him properly, Ash suddenly said. Take care of that. It's my only request, you understand? During the day, Ash went to the store to buy a black dress, opting for something simpler and without adornments. Unintentionally, she overheard a conversation between two friends who were clearly changing their entire wardrobe. You're so lucky, Claire, exclaimed the redhead to her friend. You managed to amass a fortune from that fool Corey. I envy you, in a good way of course. Thanks to you for all these things, so expensive, I could never afford them. You're my only friend, always supporting me and keeping quiet, condescendingly replied Claire. Here's my gratitude. Eric will steal from his wife again, those funds are endless for him, sneaky guy, blaming the gardener, and his foolish wife believed it. Take this coat as well, it'll suit you. Upon hearing these words, Ash was furious. She realized that innocent Neil had died in vain because of her husband's thief. Besides, she finally understood why Eric hated Neil so much. He knew too much but kept silent, probably afraid to upset weak Ash, and the unfaithful husband took advantage of it. Dropping the dress, she walked past the two young girls without saying a word, deciding that Eric, not Claire, should answer for everything. Did you steal the money from the safe? Ash asked directly, turning on the voice recorder on her phone. No, are you kidding? Eric exclaimed. But your Claire says otherwise. I know everything, tell me, or it'll get worse, Ash threatened. And Eric, stumbling and incoherently mumbling excuses, confessed to his betrayal and desire to join the company, as well as stealing money. Later that day, Ash handed over the recording to the same investigator who handled Neil's case, asking not to punish Claire too harshly. Within an hour, the lovers were brought to the police station. Claire immediately returned the money, although not all of it, settling for a suspended sentence, but Eric faced the full force of the law. Ash arranged Neil's funeral herself. A month later, she finally divorced her husband. The company's affairs started thriving again, but it didn't bring her joy because Ash missed Neil, whom she seemed to have fallen in love with. Go see Lila, the fortune teller, her mother suggested, wiping her wet cheeks with a handkerchief, while Nicholas Miles frowned. Ash didn't wait long, and the next day, taking the only photograph of Neil, she went to the famous fortune teller. The house was not far from the forest and resembled more of a fairy tale cottage than a residential building. But when Ash stepped inside, she was struck by the beauty of the decor. In the middle of the room, by the fireplace crackling with logs, a beautiful woman in her 50s sat in an armchair, stroking a black cat. Is guilt trailing behind you? The fortune teller immediately asked upon seeing the guest. Yes, it seems I hurt a good person. More than that, my beloved died because of me. I want to ask for forgiveness from Neil, Ash replied in a trembling voice. Do you have a photo? Lila asked shortly. When she took the picture, showing a cheerful Neil, she cried out, Lucas, this is my husband. How did you end up with this photo? This is my beloved Neil. He died in a fire when he was in prison. No, he didn't die, whispered Lila. My son, he's been found, he's nearby. I was not in my senses when I left my son as a baby near the doors of the orphanage. Then I ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and later my abilities for fortune-telling emerged, but I couldn't help myself. Ash left Lila's house and regained her composure. She smiled, it seemed there was hope. But she hadn't driven far when a dog darted under her wheels. Are you out of your mind? Ash shouted. The dog was exhausted and whimpered in pain. Ash had to take her to the vet, who prescribed treatment. Ash couldn't abandon Bobby, as the fluffy companion was now called by the new owner. Bobby turned out to be kind and seemed to alleviate Ash's emotional pain, which continued as she searched for her beloved. One day, Ash was walking with Bobby in the nearby forest near the lake. The dog ran around chasing birds while Ash sat by the water's edge. Suddenly, she saw a familiar reflection behind her. Ash turned around and screamed in surprise. Standing behind her was Neil. Alive, but with burns on his face and hands. Neil. She threw herself into his arms. Neil, you're alive, forgive me. He smiled, silently embraced her, and said, I forgive you, my love, then collapsed unconscious. Bobby barked loudly, calling for help. At the Virginia clinic, everyone discussed the news. A former patient was here treating her savior. Roles reversed, so to speak. Neil's surgery went well, and he looked like himself again. Travis Walker was proud. After all, such a complex and painstaking job had been done on a face ruthlessly touched by fire. Soon Neil was embracing his mother, whom her old friend Charlotte Grace had prepared for the meeting. My son, forgive me, life has been so difficult for you because of me. Don't worry, Mom, I'm just so glad you're alive, Neil whispered, burying his face in her shoulder. I hold no grudge, such is life. The others quietly left the room to let mother and son savor their happiness. To love and advice. Happiness to the young echoed from all sides at Neil and Ash's joyful wedding. Travis Walker sat in a place of honor, happy for these deserving young people and their family happiness. Neil was the happiest man in the world, having found a wife and reunited with his mother after years of wandering and deprivation. Only Nicholas Miles remained serious. He had guessed everything about who his daughter and son-in-law would bring to him, a granddaughter or grandson. Meanwhile, Lila smiled as she watched the young couple. She had known everything for a long time, but it was her secret.